Alright, in this video tutorial we're going to be doing some UV mapping of this hammer that I really quickly threw together, so let's get going. The first thing you need to learn, I suppose, is where your texture editor is. And let's see here. If you go up to Window, UV Texture Editor, it'll bring up the texture or the UV window. Now nothing will show up unless you have the model selected, and once it's selected you will see its UVs laid out, and they're not really laid out. So if you were to apply a texture to this, let me full screen it. When the texture is applied, it is applied on this 1 by 1 area. So this whole gray box, that would be your 1028 or whatever, 1024, 2048 size texture, and whatever it covers, it'll cover these UVs, and they will in turn be, the textures will be displayed. So if you don't have your UVs laid out properly, your textures will not look good at all. So what we're gonna do is lay out the textures nicely, neatly on this gray box area, and I will attempt to show you how it's done. I'm somewhat of a Maya noob. I've been doing this for a couple of years. I know some stuff. By no means do I know everything, but I kinda do know how to lay out UVs, so let's get to it. First thing you want to do is, of course, open your texture editor. Once that's open, just minimize it. You can close it, whatever, but I just minimize it and it just kind of goes to the bottom left. Okay, there's a couple ways of going about UV texturing a model. Let's see here. I usually do pieces. I don't do the whole model. It depends on the size of the model. So with this, we're gonna start pretty much from the actual hammer part. Let's see. What you want to do is go into your face mode, right click, hold face, and this isn't a tutorial on how to use Maya. You should by this point already know how to pretty much model and manipulate things and go into different modes. This is just the UV mapping part, and I might make some tutorials on the other stuff later on if you guys request them. Now that you're in your faces mode, what you want to do is pretty much select the faces you want to have UV mapped. We'll go into our perspective view or into our 4 view, and we're going to select all the faces. Hold shift and select to select multiple faces. So looks like we have all the faces of the actual hammer selected. Now there's a couple ways of doing this. You can actually take snapshots of each side, left, right, top, bottom, front, whatever, and then sew them together in the texture editor. But what I like to do sometimes with more simple models is just select the faces I want to have mapped, and then go to, let's see, yeah, it should be in polygons, create UVs, and then go automatic mapping. Settings, I mean, they should be, I usually keep them the same, whatever they're set to. So we hit project, or you can just go to create UVs and just automatic mapping, and then open your UV editor, and it kind of lays out the all the faces for you on this gray texture area. What I do next is you right click and hold and hit UV, go into UV mode, and drag and select everything, and you'll see once those UVs are selected, you can see the other UVs from the rest of the model. So I hit W for move mode, where it lets you move the UVs, and I just drag them off here. into an area. You can drag them anywhere, left, right. It's just an area where it's easier to work with your UVs. So now that we have our UVs, so let's go over that again. Select your faces that you want to have UV, then go to create UVs in automatic mapping, and that'll bring them up into your texture editor. Well, now that this is here, what we're gonna do is sue the UVs. Technically you can leave them like this and it will look okay, but as you can see, and here, let me turn something on. This little toggle shaded UV display thing is really handy. Once you have that ticked, this shows you the active or the front face of the polygon pretty much. So every 3 vertices, you see I'm already veering off into like basic modeling stuff, but this is a vertice right here, and 3 vertices make a face, and so do 4. That depends on which type of modeling you're doing, if you're doing modeling in tris or quads. So Maya, I like to model in quads. I think Maya is mostly set up for quads anyway. So every 4 vertices, 4 dots, make a face, and you have 2 sides of the face. You have the right side and the wrong side, and usually video games for optimization only use one face. You can set it up till where both faces show up in the game, but you don't need to see the inside of the hammer like you do here. Like you can see the inside of the faces inside of the hammer here, but I already lost my train of thought. Okay, anyway, so you just want to make sure that when you're laying your UVs out, you're laying them out face. If you imagine this gray area or this whole area as a table, you want to make sure you have the right way, the right face direction facing towards you, and that's what this the UV display toggle shows you. Sometimes you can map a UV and it will come up red. Let's see here, it'll look like this, red. That means if you apply texture to it, it won't show up properly in game or in your render. Now the way, say if you have a UV and it's red, what you do is make sure you're in UV mode and select that group of faces, and then you have your flip tool. You can flip it left and right, horizontally and vertically. So you just pretty much flip it over onto its proper face. So now that we have our hammer kind of spread out here on the table, what we're gonna do is we're gonna sew it together, and that pretty much means that we're gonna take all these corners here, all these edges, and we're gonna just glue them together, so when you apply the texture over it, there's no seams, and when you do normal mapping and things like that. So easiest way I've found to do that is if you go into your right click and hold and go into your edge mode, and you start selecting edges. So let's select the edge of this piece of the hammer. Let's do the right edge, and you can see once you've selected one edge, another edge lights up here. That pretty much shows you the connecting edge, because here you will see that this edge is shared among these 2 pieces. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna move them. I'm gonna select this one, go into the UV mode, select it and move it. Gonna do the same thing here, and if you select extra edges you don't need, just shift deselect them. Okay, so we're gonna move these here, and you want to line these up as close as you can, and the controls are the same to kind of pan and move and zoom, so this should be good enough. So once we have these kind of stuck together here, we're gonna go into our edge mode again, select the edge, just click once, and you're gonna click on the sew the selected edges or UVs together. Click once and they're sewed together. Now we're not gonna sew this part of the edge yet, but we might later. So now what we're gonna do is pretty much do the same operation with these 2 pieces. Click it. Oh, see, it already shows me that this edge is shared with this piece, because I don't know if you can see it, but you can see that edge got highlighted right there. Those two did. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the UV. We're going to go into UV mode, select this piece. Now you have the controls here to rotate clockwise and counterclockwise. Doesn't matter which way you go. Just click it a couple times. It does in 25-degree increments I think. So just rotate it. Again, move it up to kind of right here. And that should be good enough. Go back into your edges mode, select the edge. Like so, once you select, it doesn't matter, you just select one of the edges and both of them will light up. And as long as both of them are selected, you can click selected edge and it gets sewn. Again, we're going to do the same thing. Go into edge mode, select the edge, and that shows us the proper edge. And we're going to go to UV. So now we're just going to take this last piece, rotate it, and repeat pretty much what we've been doing. So that's good enough. Select the edge again and sew it. So now we have the pretty much most of the hammer laid out. Now what you want is you want the seams, because these pieces, since it's a four-sided rectangle, the shape of the hammer is, you want the seam, which will be here where the texture connects. So it'll be this edge and this edge. So once we have that selected, go into your 3D view and see where that seam's going to be. It's kind of nice to have the seam out of the way, not in an obvious spot. So if you were doing a first-person game, like, you don't want the seam right there, right where the player would see it. And so yeah, I think we'll just leave it there and it'll be fine where it's at. So okay, I'm happy with the seam, and we're gonna go back into the UV texture editor, and we're happy with the hammer, and all we have left is the back part of the hammer and the front part of the hammer. And we'll do pretty much the same thing with the front part. We'll select the edge, and we will see, once I have this edge selected, it's showing me that it shares this edge right here. And I want to see if that's the top of the hammer or not. And yeah, that is the top of the hammer, so that's where we're going to sew it. Whoops. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take the UV, or select it, select all the UVs and move them here. And you can see it fits in here perfectly like so. Let's just make sure it's the right edge. Yep. See how both of them get selected? Perfect. Let's undo. Okay. So we'll move it in. That looks pretty good. Select the edge, sew it, select the edge. And another handy command is, if you just did a command like a sew command or sew function, so you don't have to go up here and click it every time, you can just hit the G key on your keyboard and that'll repeat the last action you did. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm just going through and sewing all of these things together, and we can sew these, and maybe, no, yeah, I don't really think we should be sewing those. Yeah, we'll just leave those as they are. So that looks like it's all sewed together. And I suppose we can sew these too, just to make things look neater. Alright, so we have the front and we have the back of the hammer left. So let's move it up here and let's find out which one of these. I'm gonna guess the same thing. Oh no. Yep, there we go. So this is already good. We'll just move that into position here. Alright, select the edges again. Sew, and sew. There we go. So our hammer is done, and you can test this out by going into your faces mode, selecting all the faces inside the texture editor, and going into your 3D mode and making sure every single face is selected. Make sure you got everything. Alright, so now that we're done with this hammer part, we're gonna do the shaft or the handle, whatever it's called. And this we can just leave here nice and out of the way. So all we have left is to do the handle. So there we have the handle selected. In this, since I modeled the handle pretty much out of a cylinder and I just shaped the cylinder, it's pretty much all there. You can see the handle UVs laid out pretty good. So we could technically leave them like this, and I think we just might. But we will have to do a little bit of sewing together, like all these little pieces that you see that are kind of divided. And what those are, let's just check. Those are the little handle things. Yeah, we'll definitely see those together. But to make things easier for ourselves, we're gonna move this whole thing out of the way. So we'll just do that, and I wish it didn't stick these things together because that kind of sucks. Let's see if we try to move it. Yeah, I hate when that does that. Let's see if we can do something. We're gonna select all these faces, deselect these two, and now that we have these faces selected, we'll remap it. Okay, so we pretty much selected the faces for the handle, but we've only selected the radial faces, not the top or the bottom faces. And what we're gonna do, since this is all kind of cluttered together, it's a pain in the ass to select, we're just gonna remap them, just the handle. So we're gonna go, make sure you're in your polygons mode, go to create UVs, automatic mapping, and that will, that kind of spread it out, I suppose. I actually liked it the way it was before, so we can still do that. And the way we're going to do that, not automatic mapping, because as you can see, it's going to be a huge pain to sew all of these together when there's an easier way of doing it. And the way we're going to do it is we're just going to go to create UVs and do cylindrical mapping. Boom. And that mapped it out pretty good for us. So let's move it out of the way. So I say that looks pretty good. Actually, no, that's a bit too crazy. Let's deselect these faces here. Yeah, sometimes this gets a little weird. So create UV cylindrical. There we go, and we can actually use the manipulator. So let's have both the windows. When you do mapping like this, you'll get a manipulator, especially cylindrical mapping and things like that, where you can kind of play around with the scale and whatnot. So what we're gonna do is try and get this a little more proportionate. So yeah, that looks about right. If we close it all the way off and circle it, that looks fine right there. And let's have a look here. Yeah, this looks a bit thin, so we could stretch it out a little to the top. Yeah, there we go. That looks good enough. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna select the UVs of it, scale it down, and that looks like a nice UV'd handle. We can see all the details, all the polygons. So we're gonna keep it at that. We're just gonna move it off to the side. Now for the bottoms of the handles, just leave them how they are if you have them nice and neat like this. What you could do, just for kind of a no sake kind of thing, if you don't have your bottoms and tops nicely laid out like this, just select the UVs or the faces that you need. Well, we're gonna do this through the texture editor. So you select them like this, say, right? The way you can do it is go into create UVs and then do planar mapping, but go into the little options box, and you see here on the bottom left corner, you will see the axes in which your perspective is. So the top axis is, in Maya, is always Y, and for some game engines it's like Z, I think, but the top is Y, X is from the left, and or the Z's from the left and X is kind of from the front. So what you do is you want to project the image or project the UV from the top, from Y. So that's what you do. You select the Y and hit project, and my phone's going off. 1 second. Okay, so make sure you have the Y axis selected and you can hit project. I'll do that now, and it kind of projects from the very top straight down, and it'll project your UV like so. Which, if you already have it projected properly, no problem. And again, to scale these things and to move them and rotate them, it's W is to move, E is to rotate, and R is to scale. So just kind of scale it. And now that we have everything laid out properly, we're just gonna start placing the stuff. So what usually texturing, what you want to do is lay everything out on this gray box as efficiently as possible to get the most resolution out of your texture. So you can have a low resolution texture, which is better for rendering speeds and for optimization for games. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna lay these two out and kind of remember which one's which. So the bottom one, we don't really need these to be this big because it's just like the little end pieces and caps for the handle, so we're just gonna kind of leave them here. And let's see, we'll take the handle, and this will require the most detail out of all of it, so we'll scale the crap out of this. So this will be the nice big handle, and now we still have to place the actual hammer itself, and that's what we're gonna be doing. And you can rotate it, no big deal, however you think it'll be best. So we can move this out of here, move this out of here. So that's okay. I mean, there's not that many pieces. You're not going to be able to fill every single nook and cranny. Yeah, and you kind of want to keep things vertical or horizontal. You could do them at an angle. It's just going to be harder to texture and things like that. So let me move this thing back. I don't like how it's sitting here. And make that smaller, and actually we're gonna do this. Lay this out here, and this we can lay out here, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, but we just move this thing all the way to the left, and this all the way here. So that's okay. We have a lot of blank space, and I suppose that's not a big deal. I mean, we could part these and make the parts and pieces bigger or smaller, but I think it's okay as it is. So that's it. Our model is UV'd. Make sure you I like to do this sometimes, is just select the UV faces and go through and make sure everything's selected. I got everything. So yeah, that looks just fine. Now the next step is go up into your texture editor. The next step is getting this UV map into a Photoshop or whatever, so you can start painting the textures, which is like the fun part. I actually think this is the fun part, laying everything out. You just kind of zone out and do it. So what you need is, you need the UV map to be exported from Maya as I don't bother with the TIFFs. I just do a JPEG, because you'll see in a second I don't use the UV maps to texture. I use the ambient occlusion maps, and I'll show you in a second what I mean. But first, let's do the UV snapshot, which is pretty much you take a snapshot of this through Maya and it exports that as a JPEG or whatever. So you go into, once you're in your UV texture editor, you go into polygons, UV snapshot, and here where it says file name and browse, this is where the directory where you want it to be. And we're going to go into, let's go into my computer, F, and do models. And these are just some of the models I've been doing. And just make a new folder for your project or for whatever, and let's call it hammer. Okay, open that, and we're gonna say, just name it as hammer. Always underscore it, don't space things, especially in Maya. Underscore, and we're gonna go UV. We'll just leave it at that. I'm sure that's pretty self-explanatory. Now once you hit save, it's not, and you'll see here file type, usually you click it and you expect to see JPEG and TIFF or whatever. It says here from tool settings. That means exactly what you think it means. So once you have the name, once you have it named and folder selected, just hit save. And now here's where you get to play with the export settings. Now the size I have for another project I was working with was 4096 by 4096, which is freaking huge. That's way too big for any type of thing. So what we're gonna do 2048 by yeah, 2048. So that looks okay. Actually, you know, maybe 124 would be okay as well, but we'll keep it at 2048. Color value, I believe that is the color, because when you export it, this whole background is going to be black and the lines are going to be white, which is really nice. So I usually just keep it as this. And now we'll go and click, let's see here. Oh, again, file name, image format JPEG. I always like to get rid of this little dot here because sometimes, I don't remember why, I think I figured out why, but I usually like to just .jpeg just in case, rename it, and hit OK. Oh, that's right, and I believe the model needs to be selected in green as an object, and now once I hit OK, it will be exported. So now that the model is exported, let's go and have a look at it. Models for sale. And where did it go? What did we name it? Hammer. And let's open it with just picture viewer, whatever. No. So that looks fine. It's kind of stretched out because stupid Apple crap, but this is how it'll look like in your Photoshop, nice and laid out. Now I don't usually texture over that, and I'll show you why in a second. I guess this will continue into a texturing tutorial as well, painting textures. But once you have your map UV laid out, or all the UVs are laid out for your model, select your model and go into your rendering. Once that's there and your model selected, go into lighting and shading, and you will see a action for, what is it called, batch bake, mental ray. Yep, that's the stuff. Now go into the little option box on the right, click that, and now I don't remember what the settings are supposed to be, but they're set up as they need to be. So object to bake selected, it'll only bake the selected object. You can switch it to bake everything in the scene. Bake to texture, which is fine. I don't know what the vertices one does it. Bake optimization, single object, yes. Camera, perspective, sure. Keep original, use bake set override, yes. Color mode, occlusion, that's fine. Occlusion rays, 133, I don't remember. You might have to play with this stuff. It all depends on how many polygons you have your model consists of and how big your model is in world dimensions. And this is the resolution of the ambient occlusion map is gonna create for you. And let's see here, surface front, normal direction, yes, and that's what I was talking about before, where the faces or the facing polygons, it'll render those surface front. And final gather quality, again, you're just gonna have to play with this stuff. Usually for baking out ambient occlusion maps, you don't need all that high quality. You can simulate half of it in Photoshop. You just need to kind of know. And by the way, if you don't know what ambient occlusion is, it's simulated shading. What it does is it shoots light. It shoots lighting at your 3D model, and it calculates where the texture, or the shading, where all the little shadows and the nooks and crannies are going to be, and it takes those shadows and bakes them onto a texture. So when you have this model in a game or whatever in a render, your engine or your renderer isn't busy rendering all the little tiny little nooks and crannies with shadows because they're already there. They're baked into the texture. So you'll see what I mean in a second. So once we have all these things set up, we're gonna go to convert, which will start the baking process. And you'll see a little progression bar on your bottom left. I have a cutoff here, but and again, the length of time this will take, it all depends on how many polygons your model consists of and what you have your settings set to. So you can kind of see it simulated some of the shading, and I already know what I forgot to do. Let's select this, select all the faces. You should do this part before you do any of that occlusion map stuff. Go into your normals and click average normals. And what that did was pretty much take out all those little polygon corners. And you see here, this is where we had the seams. Now you can get rid of this in Photoshop later, but it'll do this if you don't. And this is, here's another seam, which I don't really care about right now. But so I'm not really happy with the way the ambient occlusion turned out, so we're gonna redo it. Select object again, go back into your baking options, and it looks like the shading, the scatter is set way too high. So what we're gonna do is occlusion fall off. So this will pretty much set how far the shading scatters. So what we're gonna do is half that. So we'll go to 2000. And again, this is kind of things you have to play with, and be thankful if your model isn't a high poly count model, because some of these can take up to 5 minutes to bake out the ambient occlusion. So good thing this is a small little simple model. So that's done, and that's better. You can kind of see the shading and whatnot, which is okay. I think I might play with it some more. Come on, there we go. Let's see, number of samples. Yeah, we can crank that up to 3. Final gather quality, we can crank this up, crank that up. Fill texture seams. Okay, I have that unchecked because I don't want it to fill texture seams, because that would be bad. Occlusion rays are pretty good. Let's just set it up to about 3 because, yeah, that should be okay. Let's convert it. Oh, the model isn't selected. Let's convert it now. And that's almost done. Okay, I like the shading on that. It looks fairly decent. And these you can paint out in Photoshop as well. So now that that's converted, I will meet you in Photoshop. Alright, so now that we have the hammer's ambient occlusion all baked out, we're gonna go into Photoshop. And here is where we start the texturing. Now, you might be wondering where it stuck that the ambient occlusion map. And if you go into the models, material attributes, you should be able to see, let's see, ambient color, I think that's where it stuck it. So, and it'll be called, I forgot to rename it, I believe. Maybe I didn't. So it'll be in your render data mental ray light map folder. So in that stuff is usually on your C drive. No matter where you put your installation of Maya, that stuff will go into the C drive, I believe. And yeah, there might be a way to change that directory, but go into your users. I don't even know why I'm here. Let's go into Photoshop first and open it from Photoshop. Open different materials, that's different. So computer, C drive, users, your name, and then I believe documents and Maya. And then that'll be under your projects, default render data, mental ray, and light map. And these are all the different ones I've done. So let's see. I believe this is the latest one that I've done. I'm not sure which one's the better one, but we'll just go with whatever. And open. And now you'll see the ambient occlusion map all baked out. Now what I don't like is these little lines here that came from polygons. I don't know why they're there. They shouldn't have happened, but whatever. What we're going to do to get rid of those is we're going to take just the regular marquee tool, select that, and we're going to apply. Let's first double click on this so it's an editable image, and we're going to go filter and blur, and we're just going to do a regular let's see, just a regular blur. Let's see, that's not helping, is it? Filter, blur more. Yeah, I guess we can just go in and blur it by hand, I suppose. Yeah, there we go. That seems to be working alright. So just go in, blur this stuff by hand if you want. You can paint it out as well. Just take a paintbrush. That'll do it. Sample the color and just paint out that make sure the flow's up, and just paint this out. We don't really need it. And this will get rid of your seams as well if you do it this way. So there we go. I suppose that looks okay. And go in here and paint this out as well. Yep, that stuff looks pretty good. Now where your seams are, what you want to do is paint those parts out too. So that's what we're going to do, but we're going to take that flow way down. Maybe a little up. There we go. So we're just going to take that weird discoloration out where you have the seams, so we don't have those ugly black lines. And this is what I meant by I don't usually use the UV maps to paint my textures. I use the ambient occlusion maps. It's a bit easier to see all the high and low spots just because of the shading. It's a little easier to kind of understand. So we'll just go through where all the seams are so they're not as obvious on the model. There we go. So yeah, this is kind of the boring part. You can try using the blur tool on the edges. I don't know how well that'll work. I'm gonna hook up my little bamboo tablet here. It's a little easier to work in Photoshop with one of these. There we go. So yeah, this will get rid of all those ugly seams. I'm sure there's a way more proper way to do this, but whatever. That's the way I do it. So there we go. Whoops. And there. Now that's it. It looks pretty good. Now we're gonna grab the blur tool and we're gonna go over all the shading and kind of blur it out like so. I think that always looks a little bit better. Just so you don't see the pixelation. And this is why I said you don't really need to have crazy detailed AO maps, is because you can always go back up into Photoshop and clean them up as much as you need to. So that looks pretty good, and we'll go through this stuff as well. Now of course, after this part we'll start laying down the actual textures and such, and there's hundreds of different ways to do it. And I don't know if I want to blur that. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that looks alright. Blur this stuff as well. So okay, not too bad. Blur a little bit of this out, and that looks fine. So now we're gonna start doing actual color painting or texture painting, whatever. So always keep this bottom layer, your AO map, as the bottom layer. So create a new layer in Photoshop. And I'm sorry if you're using GIMP. I'm not very familiar with GIMP, but it should be roughly the same. Now what we're going to do is we're going to keep all the shading once we apply the actual textures or the color maps. We're going to keep the shading, but we're going to make it bleed through whatever image we're using. So since this is our handle and it's vertical, and we're going to make our handle, let's have a look here. Yeah, I think our handle should be wooden, made out of wood, and this could be wrapped in leather, whatever. And yeah, we can do that just fine. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go to Google search, and we're going to search for a just wood texture. Go to images, find yourself a good wood texture you like. Make sure they're not planks, not particle board either. I kind of like this. View image, and it does not want to be viewed very well. Okay, fine. And this nice dark one. Yeah, we'll use this. This looks pretty cool. Save image as. Give it a second. It's opening my F drive. Yeah, we'll go to F again. Save this image. I usually like to save the textures I use. I have a separate texture folder, but we'll just save it in the hammer folder. Wood texture, fine. Save. Go back to Photoshop and let's open the thing up. Computer, let's see. That looks pretty good. And we'll just literally drag this out here. And we'll keep the scaling, and we'll just scale it down, but we'll keep the aspect the same pretty much. Just cover that up. And sure, that looks good enough right there. Now here's a trick that I learned that I thought was really super neat. So when you drag in your texture image, I mean, you can paint your own if you're super good at it, but once you drag your image in, have it selected, and have your, we actually don't need this layer, so delete that. So have this layer selected and your ambient occlusion layer, and select your blending options here. I usually like to select it and mouse roll through them. Whoops. And that'll start kind of bleeding through, and you can pick out whichever one looks best for you. Sometimes I'll use different ones just because, but you see it kind of merges the two together, and so that doesn't look too bad right there. I think it looks alright. Multiply maybe. Yeah, multiply looks better. So we'll keep it at multiply. And let's see here. Let's kind of drag this out a little further. Really can't, so we'll just leave it. Alright, and now is another good time to import open your UV map. And this is the one we exported from the texture editor. And that's what we'll use. So just kind of snap it into place and set the transfer or the opacity of it down so you can kind of see what the hell you're doing. And we can see here that this is where the handle starts, and our wood part is going to be, yep, our wooden part is going to pretty much be where the handle begins. So this is all going to be metal, this is going to be wood. So let's make that invisible, and let's go back into Photoshop or Google, and let's look for an image of iron. Ooh. Let's add texture to that. Sure, that looks pretty damn good. Internet's really slow for some reason. Maybe this one will do. We'll just let that load. So we're gonna make that the iron handle. Perfect. And this is where it'll meet. Great. Oh, there we go. I actually very much like that. Save image as. We'll keep that there. And I mean, if you're doing crazy licensed production stuff, you might want to start painting your own textures, but this will do for now, just for time's sake. And we'll open the iron image, stick that into here. Actually might want to, I think I'll use that for the actual hammer. Let's make this visible and boom, that looks alright. Yeah, I like the way that looks. And what we'll do, just to cover this little pip up, is we'll use the stamp tool. There's plenty of good tutorials on how to use the stamp tool. Once we have that in, we'll go in over the top and blur it. Actually, I shouldn't have even blurred it. That's what I used to use the eraser tool. Whoa. Yeah, that stamp tool didn't work out all that great. So we'll just try this. Perfect. Just so the coloration kind of matches. It doesn't have to be super perfect. There we go. That looks fine. And now we will actually blend this one as well. So we'll just start going through the ones we like. I like this one a lot, so we'll keep it there. Perfect. That's the one we'll use. And man, it looks pretty damn good. And I think we'll use a different iron texture for the handle, because I just don't like that other one. View image. Man, that one's kind of blurry and crappy. Let's see here. How about this one? No. Too blurry. Let's have a look. Ooh, this one's real nice. I think I'll go with this one. Yeah. It's a PNG. Ooh, getting fancy. So let's open that PNG. Drag this bad boy in. And we're gonna use it pretty much like right there. Yep. That's where it's gonna go. We can make it smaller, just increase the resolution. Yeah, that looks pretty good. But the only thing I'm worried about right now is that seam. So what we're gonna do is actually rotate it, because too much of a color difference. So I think we'll keep it like this. Perfect. And boom. I like that. And just for fun, what we're gonna do is give this layer an outer glow. When you have it selected, go to your blend mode and go to normal and change the outer glow to black, and that kind of gives it a nice little, it's a little trick I do. You can do the size and the spread, so it'll kind of show it a little shading type deal. And that looks okay. So there's that, and we'll actually, what we forgot to do is do the blending on this as well, just so the shading kind of peeps through. But what I'm not liking is, and this is what we'll do actually, we'll need to whoa. Make this invisible. Put this up, and we're gonna cut off a chunk from this layer here. So that'll be like right there. I'm gonna cut that whole section off. Perfect. And now we're gonna enable our iron, and now we're gonna do the blending on that. Let's get rid of this marquee tool. Yeah, I know this probably isn't making a whole lot of sense, but you'll just have to figure it out somehow. And it's a bit light, it's a bit crazy. Luminosity, so I think we'll go to, yeah, we can use that. Yeah, that's okay, I suppose. And let's take this tool again, the stamp tool, crank that up. Use the stamp tool again when we'll paint the caps for the, so since this is the bottom one, it'll be steel. And then we'll use the wooden one on the wood. So boom. It's kind of crappy and a neat way to do it, but meh. Looks okay to me. So there we go, we have our hammer. Now we can start adding detail and rivets and whatever you want. So now what we're going to do is we're going to save this out. So we're going to save it as a TIFF, and TIFFs are very good for Maya and for Mudbox. I think any Autodesk product TIFFs are good for. Let's go into our model folder and save it as a TIFF, and we will name it color map. Save. Okie doke. Okay, now let's go back into Maya and see what it looks like. We'll create a new material, assign new material, and we'll do it a Lambert. That looks damn good. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go to normals, average normals. That looks pretty spiffy. Material attributes, right click, and then go to color map or color whatever, click the file icon, click the folder, and then go on the hunt for your texture that you just saved out. Hammer, and well, here's the color, and it shows it to you. Open. Not too shabby. You see the shading worked out pretty well right here, and that bung looks okay. Yeah, that bottom isn't too terrible, but we can see that ugly ass seam right here, can't we? Yeah, which we'll just have to live with. So there you go. Now another cool thing to do is, I think I'll stop it right there for texturing. So yeah, that looks not too bad. And then next we'll go over color maps and specular maps and normal maps and all different sorts of maps. We can go over that and see how that kind of stuff is done. So yeah, not too bad. Texture to hammer. Alright, if you like this tutorial, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and tell me what tutorials you guys want to see more of. It'll mostly be Maya because that's the only 3D suite I know, and Mudbox as well. So yeah, let me know, and thanks for watching.